Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men Volume 2, Number 2, cover dated November 1991. The cover is by Jim Lee and Scott Williams, and this is one of my favorite covers from the new series, featuring Magneto triumphant, as the caption proclaims, and he's there with the X-Men, the blue team, apparently as statues, fallen statues around him. And he has Professor X there imprisoned in some metallic wiring and has him by the throat, so to speak. So he truly does look triumphant. And it's a great pose on the character by Lee, and it makes him look regal in that particular pose. And also he's taken some damage there, obviously, from the fight with the blue team. We can see that his costume is shredded, very likely from Wolverine with his pop claws there. Yeah, it's a really interesting cover. I like the design, this kind of semicircle design then with Magneto standing up at the center of the scene. And very likely this is colored by Joe Rosas, who's the interior colorist. And I like the way that he's picked out some rim lighting here on Magneto's costume and even the side of his face as well. Yeah, it is a really, really interesting cover, intriguing, eye-catching, draws your interest, makes you want to know how did this scene come about. One last detail to mention, this particular copy was one that I bought off the stands back in 1991, and I got it signed many, many years later in 2018 in London by Chris Claremont, so very happy to have that signed by Claremont, the author. Let's open this one up to the splash page, and this is one of my favorite splash pages from Jim Lee's run on the second volume of X-Men. Here we go. Look at that. That is absolutely stellar work. Just one of the best close-ups on Magneto wearing his helmet, so he's ready for battle. And this picks up from the end of the previous issue, X-Men number 1. We're in Genosha, that's our location, and Magneto, with his gritted teeth, means absolute business. I say again, X-Men, these acolytes have pledged themselves to my service and my cause. I shall not abandon them. So Claremont, as ever, really, really spot on with the dialogue, making it sound serious and dramatic. But look at all of the work that Scott Williams has done here in the inks over Jim Lee's pencils. All the fine detail. This is what really caught my attention, interest, and love for this artistic team back in the day. So much detail, so much time spent on this particular page. Even little craft techniques of the era, including some screen tone there on the helmet as well, in order to give it that shine. And also notice how we've got no holding lines on the side of Magneto's neck and back shoulder muscles rather there as well. So very interesting. So that allows Joe Rosas to come in with the colors, this really rich, vibrant purples and reds, and also building in some rim lighting as well with the orange and yellow around the helmet. Really, really, really great stuff. And the title of this particular story, part 2 of the 3-part storyline, Firestorm. And the creative team, Chris Claremont and Jim Lee. So Claremont and Jim Lee, co-plotters of this 3-issue story. And also Claremont providing the script, the words, and Jim Lee, very obviously, the pencil. Scott Williams, inker, Joe Rosas, colorist, and rounding out the creative team, Tom Orzechowski, letterer, long-time letterer on Uncanny X-Men. So, also just one last thing to note here. I love the dots here, the dot effect, the cyan and the yellow in the background as well. It's so interesting. I could look at this for at least an hour, yes? It really is a pleasing image and an arresting one. And then after that splash, we get a double page spread, and one of the top double page spreads from this particular volume 2 of X-Men as well. That is a great angle on Magneto there. We're kind of looking up a little bit just under his jawline, and so that's a difficult angle to pull off, but Jim Lee has done it incredibly well. And again, you can just see the excellent work from Scott Williams with his Hunt 102 Crow Quill dip pen. Makes for very interesting thick to thin line work. You can just see it there on the edge of Magneto's cloak. And again, just really giving us some interesting surfaces. So we get a sense of the leather gloves that he's wearing there as part of his costume, and then of course the shine on that metallic helmet as well. It's so interesting. And then we've got the blue team. They arrived in Genosha looking for Rogue after she was injured, but Rogue is invulnerable more or less with the detonation of a nuclear missile in the previous issue. But she's okay, she's all right, and Magneto's acolytes arrived on Genosha, started tearing the place up, and he's arrived to both take responsibility for their actions, but he's also taking no nonsense from the blue team. So really just a fabulous double page spread, really so good. And Magneto continues and he says, regarding the acolytes, they acted in an excessive zeal. If so, I, and I alone, shall determine their appropriate punishment. So this picks up some of the dialogue from the double page spread that ended X-Men #1. And basically we get a back and forth between Magneto and the X-Men here. Beast, for example, saying the Genoshians have accepted responsibility for what they've done, Magneto. They've resolved to make amends. They've changed for the better. Why is it you're going the other direction? So Magneto, according to the X-Men, potentially returning to his Silver Age character and style. So the Genoshians are not neutral in all of this. It is their country. So we've got this attack helicopter targeting Magneto here. That's a very interesting panel, an angle from Jim Lee in the art. Remember, he was an artist on Punisher War Journal, so he's got the experience of drawing military tech and equipment and vehicles, and he does a great job on these particular panels here. Magneto, master of magnetism, easily takes apart those missiles, despite their being constructed of plastic and molded ceramic composites. And he launches these steel girders at the helicopter gunship and basically destroys it, rips it apart. But you can see there that the crew manages to escape. And that's a great choice to have this as an open border panel. Jim Lee making for some interesting layouts throughout the issue. A great anchor image here of Magneto creating a hole in the ground for the blue team to fall into as he levitates above the surface. So he says to the X-Men, as I've said before, I bear you no malice, but I will not allow you to interfere. Best, I think, I remove you to the lowest levels of this facility until my business is complete. Where your myriad skills and talents can be devoted to the rescue of those innocents, my actions appear to have placed in danger. So Magneto taking command of the situation, and Rogue, how will I put it? Not quite a former flame, but they could have been lovers in the Savage Land storyline, told in issues 274 and 275 of Uncanny X-Men. She says here as she races towards him, no matter how much I care about you, Magneto, I can't let you get away with this. But Magneto's in complete charge, he says, and how, pray tell, sweet Rogue, will he stop me? As he uses a magnetic force bubble to catch her and drop her into Hammer Bay itself, beyond the city. So Fabian Cortez, he's an agent provocateur. He's been the one causing all this trouble. And he eggs Magneto on. That's the Spirit Lord, he says. But he's got an eye for Psylocke sneaking up behind him. I like the use of, it looks like probably a half-dry marker there for rendering Psylocke's shadow on that piece of masonry there. Just the attention to details in the art is excellent. And some of this is coming from the fact that Lee and Scott Williams had a 3-month lead-in to the new series. So they're not rushing here on these first 3 issues. They've got plenty of time to do their very best with the artwork, the very best job that they can deliver. So we've got Cortez punching out Psylocke, just the body language here, the command of anatomy from Lee at this point in his career. He's only at this stage 4.5 years into penciling for Marvel Comics, and he already is a master of the form, and in particular human anatomy in his very particular style, but he does it so well. And, you know, at levels of detail, in these kind of smaller panels as well, he's able to have that level of detail at that reduced size as well, which is difficult to do. You really have to know what you're doing. Little colouring error there from Joe Rosas. That should be flesh coloured there. Psylocke's left thigh. So Cortez goes in for a kiss as the means of using his power on Psylocke. And basically what it does is it overloads her power. And that's something to remember when it comes to the next issue in particular and the denouement of this particular storyline. We're learning a little bit about how his power works. The great anchor image there by Lee of Psylocke being knocked against that half-fallen wall, and also just breaking the border of the panel there with her thigh and knee and so on and so forth. And then this is interesting, not quite a full double page spread, but he's using some of this particular page for this big scene here, this operation room where we have, it's at the United Nations, and where we have various world leaders and security agencies all conferring regarding what to do about Magneto and to do about Asteroid M, and also the missiles that he has pointed at Earth. So some familiar characters that we have in this particular scene include Dr. Valerie Cooper and of course Nick Fury. It's a very cool profile shot of Nick Fury there with all of his gear on him as well. So what's happening here is they're talking about the nuclear weapons that Magneto has and how they're in Soviet airspace, with the Russian people bearing the awful consequences. No, that's his detonation of one of the nuclear missiles in the previous issue to down those jet fighters that were going after him. And this guy here says electronic systems disrupted across the continent thanks to the electromagnetic pulse, contamination in the biosphere from the release of more concentrated radioactivity and fallout than was generated by the Chernobyl disaster. So Fury says, I read the briefing papers, Comrade Alexiev. So this is still in the period of the existence of the USSR. And no, Dr. Cooper, I wasn't making fun, just an observation. So their discussion continues, and they also have a line to Genosha, where Chief Magistrate Anderson says, accuses them and says, have you got eyes? Can't you see? Well, you idiots are blithering at the United Nations. Magneto is destroying my country, and because of the strictures laid down by you after the extinction mess, my troops are powerless to stop him. We're being massacred. So that's a reference to Extinction Agenda, issues 270 to 272 of Uncanny X-Men. And Alexiev says here, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics will not allow a repeat of what has just happened to us and to Genosha. My government demands full and immediate implementation of the Magneto protocols. So these were mentioned in the first issue, and now we're going to get a little bit more information. We're going to get full information really in this issue in terms of what exactly that means. But something I want to say about Claremont's writing here is that this is typical of Claremont. Like, he has for many years been thinking about what it would be like for something like mutants to exist in the real world, and thinking out real world consequences for that and political responses from the great powers, and that's what we're getting here. So it really elevates the superhero comic to a level that's short of something like Watchmen, where it's all about deconstruction. It is short of Watchmen. It's more about enriching the superhero comics from what they were in the Silver Age to something that is more mature, but not mature in the way that Watchmen is as a deconstruction of the genre. So then we're back in Genosha. Psylocke here has all these different thoughts smashing through her head. She can't keep them out. That's what Fabian Cortez's power did to her. And then she runs into an angry crowd of Genoshians who are enraged at what's happened to their capital city. And so they call her a mutie, and they start beating her. But the Beast intervenes. That's a nice anchor image there of the Beast arriving to save Psylocke. And he basically runs off the mob. So Cortez is there to sow some doubts in Beast's mind. He says, you may well have saved your friend, though I doubt in her present state she'd consider that a blessing, but I'll wager at the cost of the X-Men's good and heroic reputation. Fair trade-off, do you think? So Beast asks him, what did you do to her? Why? What comes naturally, X-Man? I enhanced Psylocke's telepathic power to its ultimate extent. She's probably in direct contact with every sentient mind on the island. Tens of millions of people. Do you think her poor wee skull can handle the load? So that's what his power does. And remember that for the next issue. So Gambit hits him from behind with his bow staff. Interesting choice there again to break the borders and have that bow staff overlaying the final panels on the page. And now at this point Magneto intervenes and demands that everyone stop. With a whole world screaming for mutant blood, we cannot afford to waste our energies fighting amongst ourselves. And Beast retorts, strange, we always figured we were standing against injustice. And Magneto comes back with, then Beast, your place should be by my side. For what greater injustice can there be than a people who would hate and even destroy their children simply because they exist? And someone asks him, and you're any different? Your leaders are beaten, your cause lost. I call on you to yield. Actually, that's probably Beast that's saying that. So he's taken Wolverine and Cyclops out of the fight. They're both bound there, and Cyclops with some kind of obstacle to using his optic blasts as well. So they're taken care of. And then the scene switches to half a world away, to the X-Mansion. And I really like this particular panel here. We've got Forge and we've got Banshee, and they're getting into their X-Men uniforms, and Forge getting geared up with all of his different inventions, all his weaponry as well, because they're determined to take on Magneto, because they've gotten the news that he's all but nailed Cyclops' team. So yeah, they're figuring that it stands to reason he'll come for his next, that he'll go to the X-Mansion. So Professor X here is thoughtful, and he says, Forge, what can you tell me of the Magneto protocols referred to in the United Nations session? So they had a telelink to the United Nations session, and Forge says, not much. They're presidential access only files, about as top secret as things get. So the professor says, I need that information. And Banshee chimes in and says, what do you think they'll do, Charles? I've no idea, says Professor X, and that frightens me. You're talking like we're in a war. No, my friend, says the professor, they are. By the way, where's Moira? So at the end of the previous issue, X-Men #1, Moira was distraught and basically said to Banshee that everything that was happening was her fault. So Professor X goes after Moira, and he tells Banshee and Forge to stay behind. He says, I understand the risk, Forge, and I accept it. I understand your concerns for the woman you love, Banshee. Mine are no less. That is why I ask you to respect my decision. And that's because Forge thinks it's bad or unwise to leave the facility. Because if Magneto comes, how is the professor going to defend himself? But he says he accepts the risk, and off he goes. And again, interesting choice here to have a borderless little mini panel at the end of the page. It's good stuff from Jim Lee. And then we're back to Genosha. Another encounter between Rogue and Magneto. And basically Magneto makes a pitch for Rogue to join him. You've seen me at my best, Rogue, he says. Why now are you so eager to believe the worst? Offer me a fraction of the trust you give Charles Xavier without question, and I'll prove to you, beyond all shadow of a doubt, that mine is the true cause, the path to salvation for mutant kind. So it looks like she's listening. And the question is, for readers of the Savage Land storyline, which paired the two together, whether she might go over to Magneto's side. But Psylocke has got her wits about her again, and she attacks Magneto from behind with her psychic knife. And she says here, my amplified powers made my psychic knife so strong, not even your defenses can stop it. So that is an effect of Fabian Cortez's power, and Psylocke's using it against Magneto. Magneto says, well, it looks like he's in trouble. And I always like this piece of dialogue that Claremont gave Psylocke, where she is impressed with Magneto's resistance to the psychic knife, the force of the man. She says, I only have an edge because I caught him off guard. Under normal circumstances, at my normal levels, I doubt I could even come close to hurting him. So Rogue is going to join and help Psylocke take him down, but then something happens. They turn into these chrome forms of themselves, and that's one of the Acolyte's power. And, you know, funnily enough, his name is Chrome. So he says, "Forgive me, Lord, for not coming sooner to your assistance." But was that on Fabian Cortez's orders? "Better late than never," says Magneto. "Are they alive?" "Frozen in a transitory statue state." So that's what they are on the cover. Because the cover, it makes them look like they're marble or some other form of stone statue, but they're actually chrome statues and in a transitory statue state. So they are still alive. I like this shot of Magneto with his magnetic bubble taking the blue team and the Acolytes up to Asteroid M. Great angle there that Jim Lee's pulled off. So Magneto says he's going to Asteroid M. He's going to determine the X-Men's fate there. And I like this too. "And yours, Cortez. None of this would have happened had you not mounted this attack." So Magneto's no fool. And he tells Cortez not to defy his orders again and not to do anything behind his back. And Cortez says, "Before you pass judgment, Lord, I've uncovered some information I believe you ought to know." And this is what's going to tie into Moira McTaggart's breakdown at the end of the previous issue. So we have an establishing shot from Asteroid M. We've got those missiles aimed at Earth. And here Cortez reveals to Magneto that there is a discrepancy between the genetic codes in the master files and what I sensed in your own body when he was using his powers to heal Magneto's wounds sustained from the fight with the blue team, and in particular Wolverine in X-Men #1. And so Magneto says there, "And you saw fit to withhold this revelation from me?" And he's sweating as well because even though he's strong, these fights with the blue team have taken a lot out of him. So Cortez says, "You were asleep when I led my strike team to Genosha. I meant to inform you upon our return. In truth, I wasn't sure what to make of it." Now Magneto draws his own conclusions here and says, "It's a piece of genetic engineering, an artificial alteration in my DNA codes, and I know of only one way it could have occurred." And then we switch to the Soviet Union and a rocket launch, and this is the Magneto protocols. So what they've done is they've launched a plasma cannon into space, and that's what they're going to use against Magneto should they feel they need to. So a nice little 3-panel sequence there, and then an establishing shot of the boathouse on the shore of Breakstone Lake. Later on, about 2.5 years from now, when Scott and Jean get married finally, that will be their marital home, the boathouse on the shore of Breakstone Lake. And I like the colouring here from Joe Rosas as well, the indication of sunset and the oranges and yellows. And this is one of my favourite panels from this particular issue. It's a very simple panel, but the lighting here, the use of what looks like a kind of like a dry marker as well, indicating the slats here on the window, and just the idea of having a little kind of sunburst coming through as the sun is setting, and the colours just perfect yellow and red on Moira McTaggart's face. And basically she says, "Once I held back the truth about my mutant son Proteus until he went mad and the time came for the X-Men to fight him to death. Now you're afraid I've done it again," she says. And who's there in the boathouse except for Magneto? And that's what Forge was afraid of, and that's what Banshee were afraid of. They weren't wrong. And here he is. He says, "Charles Xavier is not the only interested party here, Dr. McTaggart. And if you are hiding something, especially something that I strongly suspect pertains to me, I really must insist you reveal what it is." And then he rips the boathouse from the shoreline and takes it up into the sky, up to Asteroid M. Actually, now that I see that, it makes me think that the boathouse must have been rebuilt for Scott and Jean to live in. So Forge says here, "I like this as well. I told the man, I warned him." That's really great dialogue. And it really reveals, Forge and Banshee are mature men in their own right. They're not Forge was not and never was a student of Charles Xavier's. Banshee was, as one of the all new, all different X-Men, but he wasn't a teenaged student of Professor X's. These are mature men, and they had a proper perspective on what could have gone wrong. But Banshee says, and I like this too, no use belly aching. We underestimated Magneto and he burned us. The question now is, what do we do next? So these are the guys who are going to come up with the plan on what to do next. Let's continue with the story. Yeah, so as the boathouse is arcing up to Asteroid M, we get a scene inside, and I love the detail of the timbers of the floor kind of coming apart because it's lost its base on the ground, but Magneto's holding it together. And we have this dialogue, like in Moira. I love the way that Lee has drawn her with her hair all over the place and those kind of dark bags under her eyes as well. It really seems like, she's been emotionally through the mill in terms of the guilt she's feeling about whatever it is that she's done. Professor X has no idea what's going on. What's the meaning of this, Magneto? Why have you abducted us? He says, I've questions that require answers from you both, and I did not wish to be disturbed in the process. By the way, a great drawing of Magneto from behind the anatomy there, the back muscles, the muscles on the back of the arm and legs. So well done by Lee, and the perspective also is excellent. So Magneto continues and says, I found some intriguing anomalies in my DNA matrix. I was wondering what you might tell me about it. And Professor says, I haven't the foggiest notion what you're talking about. I hope that's true, because we were friends once. And I like this detail too. Magneto pouring some scotch from the bottle that Moira had been drinking. And when one friend betrays the other's trust, it leaves a wound that never truly heals. Cast your minds back, both of you, to my earliest incarnation and that regrettable confrontation in the United Nations with a mutant of my own creation, which resulted in my being reduced to a state of infancy. So this is Mutant Alpha, and this was a story that was told in Defenders number 16, where Mutant Alpha decided that Magneto and the Brotherhood had been acting like children and so reduced them to the state of a child. And there is Magneto with his adult's costume hanging around him. I love the choice here, the artistic and aesthetic choice of blacking out everything of Magneto except little details of his costume, and also the inking here of the shadow cast from Magneto's helmet over his eyes and cheek. That's really nicely done as well, whether it's done with a brush or a marker. Very nicely done. So let's continue here. And yeah, so more flashback to the past. A staple of Marvel Comics in the 80s and 90s, 70s, 80s and 90s, for any kind of flashback is you get a curved border to a panel. So we see them here. I was then entrusted into the care of Moira MacTaggart, says Magneto, and sent to live at her Mur Isle Mutant Research Centre. Who knows, I might have lived a normal life had not an agent of the alien Shi'ar restored me to my prime. And we see that with a footnote here was a story told in Uncanny X-Men 104. It's unusual for Bob Harris to get these footnotes correct, but something that was a staple of Chris Claremont's scripts was that he included the footnotes. So these are not Bob Harris footnotes. These are footnotes that are actually coming from Claremont's script, and Bob Harris taking the credit, so to speak. In any case, back here, Magneto gets to the point. The question is, what occurred during the months I was in your care, Moira? So she denies knowing what he's talking about. He says, that's a pity. Regrettably, I don't believe you. And here we see Magneto prepared to, frighten and terrorize Moira into telling him what happened by pushing Professor X out into the vacuum of space. And he says, I suggest you search your soul rather quickly and find a better, truer answer. And the professor accuses Magneto of talking of friendship and trust, but relaying them in this manner. Where's the good, decent, honourable man to whom I entrusted my school back in Uncanny X-Men 200? You proceeded from a false assumption, Charles, says Magneto. The question is not what happened to that man you describe, but whether he ever even existed. Only Dr. Moira MacTaggart can answer that. And if she has any regard at all for your life, old friend, then save him, he says to her. And she says, stop. I'll tell you what you want to know. Just bring him back inside, please. I beg you. I'll tell you everything. And Magneto says, I never doubted it for an instant. So it was all a ruse. But you never know. But that's what I think, it was a ruse. There's the boathouse wrecked as they make their way to Asteroid M. This is a nice little panel. These interesting small little establishing panels that Jim Lee did in this era, they look good. And then he turns the angle around and we get to see Magneto. Magneto's looking out over the planet from the observation deck there. And now we got a shot of him and what's behind him. That's really, really well drawn. And a kind of like an upshot, slight worm's eye view of Magneto there. Again, makes him look so regal and masterful in this particular image. So the blue team's captured and they are manacled there in various different ways. And Magneto says, okay, we're waiting for what you have to say. So Moira's going to have to say this in front of everything. She says, I thought if I could modify the genetic matrix, eliminate the instability of infant Magneto, perhaps I thought I might use the same process to save my son. Oh, so she was using Magneto as a guinea pig. He's not going to be happy with that, and indeed he's not. How seductively noble. An end that surely justified any means, no matter how foul. And that's so ironic, and that's so well chosen, that dialogue by Chris Claremont, because the irony is that is how Magneto has been operating of late, and how he always operated. A noble end, but one where it was considered in true Machiavellian wise that any means justified that end, that noble end, no matter how foul. Nice spotting of blacks there as well on his face on that 3/4 profile reverse angle on his face. Difficult to do. Lee and Williams pull it off well. And Moira, crying there, says, you were a child again and innocent with a second chance to live your life over. And here we go. Magneto's enraged. And who gave you the right to play God with my soul? By the eternal, by tinkering with the foundation of my being, you took from me the dimensions of moral choice. Every decision I've made since my rebirth is now suspect, thanks to you. Every fiber of my being thrown into chaos. And, you know, this kind of holds up the possibility that Magneto's redemption arc, which began in Uncanny X-Men 150 and continued on through Uncanny X-Men 200 and on into the era where he was headmaster of the New Mutants, could have all been down to an alteration of his DNA. And who he truly is basically the Silver Age villain. So he basically says here, this is interesting too. He says, every decision I've made since my rebirth is now suspect thanks to you. Every fiber of my being thrown into chaos. How else did you tinker, Doctor? Did it amuse you to see how easily I might be manipulated? And she protests it wasn't like that. And he says, of course not. You worked for the betterment of the world and the race. I heard those same rationales as a boy in the Auschwitz death camp from Dr. Joseph Mengele himself. So again, Claremont bringing in that history, back history and story he established for Magneto in Uncanny X-Men 150 that is so enriched and deepened the character. Look at the acolytes looking on. Look at the detail there again. What I was saying earlier about the attention that Lee and Williams are able to pay to very small details in the backgrounds. They've got the time in this period to do all of this. So then he uses his magnetic power to cover Moira with this liquid metal. And he says, basically, you cannot resist me, Moira, or the tide of history I represent. For you are only human. I grow impatient for your answer. I do not bother lying. That metal skin sheath not only gives me absolute control over your body, but a total awareness of it as well. I will sense the slightest attempt at deception and respond accordingly. Do we understand each other? Will you behave yourself and do as I command? And that is, he wants her to replicate the process with the X-Men. So that's, you know, a kind of like a dark payback and revenge, and much more in keeping with Silver Age Magneto. So then we get a little prologue here in respect of the story that will kick off properly in X-Men number 4 after Claremont has left. But he does the dialogue for this. So we've got this little scene somewhere between the Soviet Union and Japan, and there's an exchange of this body, and basically there's a double cross. So Matsuo Tsurayaba double crosses the Soviets, and they end up dead. And he says to them, "Goodbye, General, our business is now concluded, but who's in that sarcophagus?" And that's an interesting little colour hole there as well, the reflection on Tsurayaba's glasses. And look at this, look at the lettering here in this particular panel. So the letters here, later Asteroid M, and Professor Xavier here in Cyclops' speech balloon, not done by Tom Warzakowski. This looks like it's editorial, like somebody decided that it was confusing to go from this panel to this panel without a little exposition of the switch of scene to Asteroid M. So now it seems like the process has been repeated on the blue team. That is a wonderful anchor image of the blue team there. Such fine detail, such really fine lines. Look, you can see it on the jawline of Psylocke there. Really, really great detail in that particular panel. That's what so fascinated me at the time. How was this even possible to do, and on a monthly schedule? But they did have the 3 months in the run-up to X-Men number 1, and I'm sure they got some of X-Men number 2 in the can as well in that period. So Cyclops says to the Professor's shocked. He says, "I know this will be hard for you to understand, but a lot of what that's Magneto, says makes sense. Maybe his means are a little extreme, but I think we can temper them. The plain fact, though, is that while your dream of peaceful integration was ripe for its day, times have changed. We have to change to match it, same as Cable and his X-Force. Magneto is the right man for this era, sir, and we mean to stand by him to the end." So, and now we're back on Earth and in the danger room of the X-Mansion, and no little caption to explain the scene shift either. Anyway, that's hilarious, that other one over there. So this is there's these, what would we call it? We call it like wargaming, where Forge, well actually it's Jean and Storm here, are trying to figure out how they might beat the blue team, the Acolytes and Magneto, just with their own team. That's a great image there of Wolverine with his claws popped and gripping Storm there by her costume. And Jean says, "Thing is, after 10 tries and 10 straight massacres, a body has to begin to wonder." And Storm completes the point. "We're a match for Cyclops' team, or for the Acolytes, or possibly, if the goddess is very kind, even for Magneto. But all of them together? Well, that's why we have the Danger Room, to examine how our foes think and act, that we may better uncover a weakness we can use to defeat them. Always assuming they have one," says Jean. "Scott and his team are the key. You're certain they've been turned?" "I'm afraid so," says Jean. "But how is it? You know, through the psychic rapport you once shared with Scott?" And that's a little interesting story point there, because their psychic rapport has not been restored yet at this point in the continuity. And then they're interrupted by Forge. "Sorry to interrupt, ladies. Another loss? Geez Louise, Aurora. What are we today, the Mets?" It's a little joke there. And then Nick Fury, a hologram of Nick Fury, is on screen for them to listen to. And he talks about how, "I'm breaking a whole host of rules by making this call, Forge, but I don't much care. The decision's been made and ratified by the Security Council," that's the UN Security Council, "to execute Stage 3 of the Magneto Protocols. In compliance, American strategic forces have gone to DEFCON 1, so have the Russians. In effect, a state of war now exists between the great powers and Magneto, and they mean to do whatever's necessary to bring him down. The Russians have launched an assault vehicle representing the pinnacle of their military technology. It's an energy cannon, firing beams of ultra intensity nuclear plasma. It's never been field tested. It's so powerful they didn't dare inside the atmosphere. It's the kind of weapon a body would use to punch through planets." Wow. Which is pretty much just what they intend to do to Magneto's orbiting rock and everyone aboard. So we've got like a computer simulation of what's going to happen if they fire that cannon at Asteroid M. So obviously the X-Men are aboard, Professor X is aboard, and he's telling them that if you're going to move, it's got to be now and it's got to be fast. Another great anchor image here at the end of the page of the Gold team, plus Forge and Banshee. So Iceman says, you guys saw the simulations, we got creamed. We're open to suggestions, Iceman says Colossus. And Archangel, it's what we're here for, kiddo, why Professor X founded the team. And Storm sums it up. Oh no, Forge says here, look at the little tail. It's not quite connected to that balloon. You know Magneto's sure to be waiting for us. And Storm says, then Forge, let us not disappoint him. Whatever the risk, my friends, regardless of the odds, we must at least try. To be concluded. And again, just great detail on this final page. No sense of any rushing going on, unless it's a little bit in the lettering there. The lettering would be done after the artwork and after... well, actually, sometimes the lettering, when it was done on the board, was done before the inking, in fact. But there wasn't time to correct that little crossing of the tail by the speech balloon. This is a comic that I've always been intrigued by and that I must get my hands on, The Legion of Night by Steve Gerber and Whilce Portacio. So I'm going to try and get my hands on that, and if I do, I'll review it on the channel. So no letters page in this particular issue. It was 22 pages of story. I really loved at the time and still do X-Men #2. That rhymes, but it wasn't intentional. Let me know what you think of this particular issue, the story itself, the art, everything. If you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like the video on YouTube. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.